Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. We are in 2 Kings chapter 19. Yesterday in chapter 18, we saw the Assyrian army surrounding Jerusalem and demanding that they surrender unconditionally and be deported, or they will face total destruction. And in chapter 19, Hezekiah does what he should have done the whole time. He turns to God. And he does that initially through the prophet Isaiah. Look at verses 1 and 2. When King Hezekiah heard it, this threat, even though they had paid the tribute, as we talked about yesterday, either you surrender unconditionally and let us deport you, or we will destroy the city and we will destroy you. When Hezekiah hears this, he tears his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth. People would do that when they were repenting. They would do that when they were heartbroken. They would do that when they are seeking God, when they are devastated. It was a sign of humility. And he entered the house of the Lord. He goes to the temple. And then he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and these other people, sent them covered with sackcloth to Isaiah the prophet. So he's in the temple praying, and he sends his representatives to Isaiah and tells Isaiah what Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, is demanding, and wants Isaiah to seek God on behalf of Hezekiah and the nation of Judah. And Isaiah's response in verse 6, Isaiah said to them, to these representatives from Hezekiah, "Thus you shall say to your master, to King Hezekiah of Judah, Thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard from the Assyrians." Don't be afraid of what they said. "And which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me," making a mockery of God. Your God can't save you. Well, not only were they attacking Hezekiah and Judah, now their arrogance caused them to attack God. And that took everything to a whole nother level. Verse 7, "Behold, I will put a spirit in him, in Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, so that he will hear a rumor and return to his own land. And I will make him fall by the sword in his own land." God, through Isaiah, says, don't be afraid. I'm going to create a situation that will cause him to withdraw. And then once he's back home, he will die. He will be assassinated. Well, Assyria begins hearing about these other nations they had subjugated rebelling. And so he has to withdraw his army from Jerusalem temporarily to go deal with those other problems. And as he's doing that, Sennacherib sends a letter to Hezekiah saying, "Hey, now, just because we're leaving, don't think you're off the hook, because once I deal with these other nations, I'm coming back and I'm going to put you in your place." And notice what Hezekiah does when he gets that letter. Verse 14 of chapter 19. "Hezekiah took the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And he went up to the house of the Lord and he spread it out before the Lord. Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, angelic beings, you are the God. You alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear, and open your eyes," etc., etc. And then he goes on to describe the threat that Sennacherib had made, and so on. So what does he do this time? He goes to the temple and he seeks God. And notice what God does and how God communicates to him through Isaiah down in verse 20. "Then Isaiah, the son of Amos, sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me about Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard you." And he goes on to describe what God's going to do to Assyria. And down in verses 27 and 28 makes it really clear that because of the arrogance of Sennacherib and the Assyrians raging in verse 28 against me, against God, and because of your arrogance has come up to my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bridle in your lips, and I will turn you back by the way which you came. God, through Isaiah, says to Hezekiah and to Assyria, because they have been so arrogant against God, God says, you're not going to conquer Jerusalem. I'm going to put my hook in your lips and my bridle in your mouth, and I'm going to pull you back the same way you came. You're going back to your homeland without ever destroying Jerusalem because of your arrogance and your mockery of me. And it's a very powerful message. And you can go on and read the rest of the chapter. That's what happened. Assyria left. And sometime after that, when Sennacherib was back in his home, he was actually assassinated in his homeland, just like God had told Isaiah would happen. That is exactly what happened to Sennacherib. His army leaves, and Jerusalem, Judah is delivered, and eventually Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, dies. Now, when you and I are afraid, when we are challenged, when we are intimidated and so on, it is so easy for us to tune out God and what He's trying to say and listen to all those other voices. Listen to the voice that's the loudest, the voice that's the strongest. Listen to the voice that's the meanest. Listen, we listen to all the voices. And we tune out God. Because quite often God doesn't scream like all those other voices. He speaks sometimes more quietly. And Hezekiah did what was right. He sent and got advice from Isaiah. He went to the temple and sought God. And sometimes you need to seek out guidance from godly people who are not going to be as emotional as you are in the moment. And seek God, but if you're not willing to listen to those voices, they won't do you any good. Hezekiah was aware of his reality. He was aware of the danger his nation faced from the Assyrians. But he took the time to pull back from all that noise and all that busyness and all that threat, to pull away and quit listening to those voices so he could actually hear God's voice. And once he heard God's voice, he had clarity. It's important you and I learn how to do that. I've sometimes said when you are the busiest, that's when you need to pull away and spend time with God the most. When a lot of people are screaming for your attention, that's when you need to pull away and get alone with God the most so that you hear His voice. That's the lesson for me from this chapter in Hezekiah. I'll see you tomorrow as we continue this journey.